Hi everyone, tonight we're going to be looking at extensions. Thank you all for coming. We're going to be looking at, obviously extensions are, I guess, the biggest and newest part of BP debating. So I'm going to assume for this presentation people have an understanding of like the broad structure of how BP debate works, but if I ever say any terms in it is unclear, please just interrupt me and say what the fuck you're talking about and explain to me the answer. But otherwise we're going to look at what actually makes an extension tonight and how to go about doing it. I think the biggest piece of advice I'll give right off the bat with extensions though is there's something that unfortunately just takes practice. The more you do of it, the better you'll get at coming up with ideas, of thinking differently, of filling gaps, etc. So it is like, this presentation won't give you a magical set of tools that will mean you can win every debate from closing. It will hopefully give you a bunch of strategies and ideas to think about at closing that can help you come up with ideas and come up with extensions. So I wander across the button. What is an extension? It is not just the extension table, but that is a pretty good representation of someone trying to get an extension in a debate. I tried to incorporate a few cat gifs into tonight's presentation for the audience's enjoyment. So the important thing about an extension is, this was something that I don't think is very clear lots of the time, is every single thing you say at closing is an extension, right? There's no such thing as you didn't have an extension. Everything's an extension. That's arguments, rebuttals, it's examples, it's characterizations, contextualizations. The question of it though is like, how new is an extension? So when judges say you didn't really have an extension, what they probably should be saying is your extension wasn't new. It was derivative, it had already been heard, or didn't add anything to the debate. So, and the thing about that is then, the way it's assessed is anything that is not new, so anything that is derivative of your opening, is just discounted, but it's not like you're punished for it. We just only assess the bit of your speech that is the new extension material part of your speech. So an extension is anything you say. That becomes useful in the tips at the end. So what makes something new, I guess, is an important question about like what do you actually have to do to be new in a debate. So a rule of thumb that I think is useful is you've basically got to be 15 minutes better than what your opening was, because you've got more time. So the balance of the BP is, yes, it is hard for closing teams, you've got to think of something extra your opening hasn't already said, but opening has to rush to the room, they've only got like then 10 minutes of prep after that to do it, and they've got to start speaking. You've got the whole top half, which is another, sorry, that's actually 30 minutes. I didn't do my math properly. There's 4 speeches in the top half. It's going to be 30 minutes better than what your opening has. So the idea there is you've got to be actually adding a meaningful difference to the debate. So what makes something new? It could be a wholly new argument, which I probably should have listed there as the first thing. Like an entirely new argument can be something new, like a new area that's touched on. It can also be new mechanization, so new reasons why something is true. I will note with the mechanizations one, is if your opening is provided, say, 3 reasons why prisoners can consent to doing socially utile but undervalued. So the motion is that we would allow prisoners to volunteer for socially utile but undesirable activities, e.g. drug trials, military service, hard labour. If your opening has already provided 3 reasons why prisoners can meaningfully consent to that, and you at closing provided 3 extra reasons why prisoners can meaningfully consent to that, they have got to be 3 much better reasons that do a significantly better job than what your opening has at proving that. Otherwise, judges are going to be like, well, you give me 3 extra reasons, nothing bigger or better about them, and I still believe the same. I already believe that claim from your opening, you didn't add anything to it or grow it. So you can have new mechanizations, but they've got to be new and better and more important reasons why something is true. Similar things with impacts. You can have new impacts to an argument, so take a similar line of logic and then explain why what this new impact is. But again, you've got to rely almost on different mechanizations, because a lot of judges will be a bit unwilling to credit borrowing all the proof that your opening has done and then just adding a new impact on the end and saying something else is different. That is not to say you can never do that as an extension. Sometimes you can do an impacting extension by taking it to a whole new context, which I'll talk about in a second, and explaining a bunch of different impacts there. But you also do a really big job of explaining what these impacts are, why they're so big, and why they're so much more important than your opening team has. The last thing then is what makes something new is a new way of looking at the debate. So you can just think about it from a new frame of reference or a new perspective on the debate that changes the way they think about it. The important thing I want to say about what makes something new, particularly with extensions, is that, and this one I think it differs again from 3 on 3, because in 3 on 3 you get away by saying why something is important, why something is true, and that'll normally get you pretty far in the debate. You should know why it's important, but normally to prove it's true, that's most of the way in 3 on 3. In BP, it is essential to prove that it is new and that it is important in the debate, so it actually matters. So you get some weighing as to why it's the most important thing in the debate, or more specifically, more important than your opening. And that's where all the standard weighing metrics come into play. Does it have a bigger impact on likelihood? Is the impact itself bigger? Does it impact more people? Does it impact a vulnerable group we should care about more? Does it have a principal reason why you should weigh it more? Does the impact last longer? Whatever it is, something about why that thing should be considered more crucial to debate than what your opening does. I know this is about to be about extensions, but to give you another tip on opening as well, you should also think about opening half. You have to do that importance as well. You've got to preemptively explain why opening is more important, so a closing team can't come in later and say it is more important. So broadly, just what makes something new is it is just a new contribution to the debate. It's then a question of how relevant or important that thing is in terms of being new. What does not make something new? What does not make something new? Apologies to everyone, I really should have proofread this a bit more. Don't be derivative is the big thing, right? So derivative just means you're copying your opening. So when judges will accuse you of being derivative, it normally means you've got the same mechanisms as your opening, so you're just proving the same thing in the same way. It may mean you've got the same impact, maybe it's a different stakeholder. So if you've got a debate where the top half talks about feminism and the impact on women, and in your closing, you're like, well, our impact's going to be on women of colour, which is a genuine, fair enough extension, but then every single impact on women of colour is the same as impact on women. That wouldn't be considered new, you've just given a new framing on it without actually adding as to why that group is different or more important. I hope that is quite an example where you could go different, but haven't in that case. And also just copying any part of your opening would also be called derivative, right? So just don't copy what your opening does, try and add something new. I know, I can see it behind all of your eyes. This is the question of like, but what if opening says everything? That will be coming at parts of the presentation today. So to hold that burning question in. But are there any other questions so far? Okay, let's talk about coming up with extensions. So the first thing is, you just need to come up with extensions just like you would any other normal argument. At the end of the day, an extension is just another or a different argument. So the same way you push yourself to come up with more arguments or more reasons why an opening half is what you'll be doing in closing half and with new arguments and new ideas. So just brainstorm like you would normally in prep. We'll have a whole slide on prep later in the presentation. What you want to be looking for to try and think a bit outside the box is to try and look for new angles. I think this is kind of similar to how you would at the second speaker, where you're trying to come up with new standard at the second speaker. It's similar to that kind of thing. So maybe looking for a new impact, so impact new group pillars we talked about. Maybe looking for a new argument, so a whole area that hasn't been touched before. And I will say with arguments, for anyone who's watched or went to the presentation at the start of the year about how to do a debate when you know nothing about the topic, we would have gone through in there a lot of sections that were like, well, in law debates, there's 4 things in law you look at, like deterrence, retribution, rehabilitation, protection. In debates, British should pretty prep this, but I've forgotten them all now. But in lots of debates, it's like a standard set of like arguments or ideas or clashes you'll have. You can just be looking at like, one of those normal clashes, run one that opening doesn't run. You can secondly be looking for new contexts. So the classic example of extensions is you go from the top half being very developed world focused to very Western world focused. We're going to bring in developing world angle to this, so explain how it impacts a different group of people. And that's really useful in British Parliamentary because it is used for the world's format and like the Oswegans format, etc. It is a globalised format, so the idea is the whole world is fair game in the debate. Obviously, like wildly illiberal or wild dictatorships don't really apply in the West. It has some sort of functioning level of democracy in government. So most debates don't happen in North Korea, but they do happen in quasi-democracies or backsliding democracies, Hungary, Poland, etc. So you can take it to a whole new context in the debate and say, okay, well, this will have this economic impact about banking regulations may affect America, but they'll be fine because they're rich. What's more important is what has an impact developing world economies in this way. So taking to a new context can be very useful. Thirdly, just look at a new stakeholder. So often debates will focus on a couple of stakeholders at the top half, so they can't fit everybody in. So you can try and find a new person that impacts and try talking about them. So all those basics we do in 3-on-3, where you sit down and you list all the stakeholders in the debate, also very useful for BP in case the stakeholder isn't captured properly by your opening. And there's also, you can do things like a principal or a practical split. So if the top half's very principled, you can try and make it practical, or vice versa. So there's plenty of different ways you can think about coming up with ideas. But the thing is, I know it sounds silly, but when you're in prep, you're not looking or thinking about an extension, you're just thinking about arguments. And those become extensions later. Extension is not a special or different thing in debating, it's just another set of arguments that are given by closing teams. And that will hopefully make you in the mindset you're going to think of like the most radical new creative idea in the world. You often just need to think of the same basic ideas and try and push wider and wider. So I guess if you've ever done zoom in, zoom out stuff in prep where you either start small and go big or start big and go small, same thing applies here. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Let's look, now what we're going to do is take a brief detour and talk a bit about opening half strategies. And the reason for that is identifying what an opening half strategy is being done will then help you direct closing half strategy for how then to think about what to prioritise in argumentation. Because the thing about BP is it's all very intricate with lots of teams going back and forth. So if you can think about how opening half is functioning, that can unlock a direction or a pathway for you thinking about closing half. So if you may have heard this before, there are two very broad approaches to how opening half works. There's a scorched earth and there's a deep dive. Has anyone heard of that before? A few nods, that's good. So, scorched earth. This is where an opening half team tries to run as many arguments as they possibly can to try and cover everything in the debate. The benefit of this is obviously they're trying to lock you out. They're trying to take all the good material so the closing team has nothing left to say. But the con of this is a lot of the time it is very hard to run every possible argument sufficiently well with sufficient depth to actually make it done well. So what you do then as a closing half team is say, okay, they may have run 3 arguments we had in prep. They've actually done this one really badly. So we can take this argument and run it better. So that's where I think you would go through. So with extension ideas in prep, you would write down every argument idea you have, cross out the ones as they're taken. You might put a dot next to the one that you think actually has been done very well and go back to that. So you can go through that list and say, okay, they haven't actually run our second idea very well. We're going to go and we're going to run that deeply. Actually, we'll talk about that in a second. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But that's what a scorched earth tactic is. You use everything in the debate to try and block out the closing. The other one is deep dive. So a deep dive is where an opening doesn't try and cover every argument, but just picks what it thinks is the 1 or 2 most important ones, and then tries to go really deep and explain those really, really well. The benefit of this for opening is it makes it very hard for closing to run a similar idea, because it's already pretty well done by the opening. But the benefit is that if your arguments get rebutted or get outweighed, which is what you're trying to do with closing, it can be hard to come first in the debate because all your eggs are in one basket. So what you should be doing to think about this strategy from opening is when you think there are too many arguments, but you want to have a really cracker idea you think will win. And that's where I think the theory that Brendan Winters and Joe Ashcroft from New Zealand espouse is that opening teams should think about their cases like closing teams. Pick the 1 or 2 big ideas you think are the most important, prove them really well, and then spend time proving why they're the most important argument in the debate, like you would with an extension. Do those two opening half approaches make sense? Okay, now let's think about how we do it if we were a closing team. So there are 2 broad strategies based off that, horizontal and vertical. Let's look at a horizontal extension here for today. You'll hear these terms a lot with extensions. So a horizontal extension is where you run an extension that's completely different to your opening and takes a whole new line of argument in the debate. The pro of this is it is definitely new. It is definitely new content, no one's talked about it before. But the con is that sometimes it'll be hard to prove how important it is, or maybe it'll just be low impact because the opening is taking the highest impact part of the case. So what you've got to do then is try and really sell why this new argument ought to be more important or weighed more heavily than what your opening does. So what is normally good to think about how to use when thinking about going horizontal is listen to your Prime Minister or your opposition leader's speech and think, okay, they have not covered very much in this debate. It gives us a new thing, let's pick one thing, let's run with it. And that's when you might use a horizontal approach. And so all those stuff I talked about earlier about how to brainstorm arguments, this is where you start thinking, okay, well this is the argument, it's horizontal, this goes in here. Does that make sense? So think about debates in context. The next approach is vertical. So, yeah, this visual gag never fails to slap. All the gifts, the cat underwater, no responses, but this one always gets it. So, vertical. This is where you take an argument your opening is run and you just go vertically deeper and try and explain it better or expand it more. So the benefit of this is, if you do it well and you win it, you will almost certainly, there's always caveats, no team ever locked in the first or fourth, but you're more likely to come over your opening if you've taken their case and just done it better than them. I've heard a few of you over recent weeks talk about how that's happened to you at comps. So it can be a successful strategy. And it also means you can directly clash with what the diagonally opposite responses have been. So if you're CG and you extend vertically on your OG, the way you're hopefully standing vertically is also by rebutting what opening positions said about opening government's case. So it also is a 2-pronged approach there to try and help you rebut your OO. I should have said this earlier, the same way horizontally, finding a new area in the debate can hopefully push your OO out as well, because they've been too preoccupied with OG's clash and you're trying to find a new clash in the debate. So both these strategies can help attack both the top half teams and not just your direct opening. The con of this is you have to make sure it's deep enough to credit it as an extension. Some judges will be very critical about extensions and expect a lot of newness. There's actually been a bit of discourse, I think, at the moment about how judges are assessing extensions, about whether they're being too punitive or too lenient. I think the feedback from the recent Euros was that judges were being too punitive in how they were crediting extensions as being new. So you've got to play it by ear. There's a risk with every strategy, right? About weighing up what you think is the most useful one at the time. So, the way you use this approach though, is when your opening team has left you no new arguments to say or scorch the earth, you just pick something and you run with it and try and run it better or slightly different than what they have. This is the last piece of advice I'll give on this slide, is just, if nothing else, just get up there and say what your opening said. Worst case, you're going to lose, but you would have lost if you got up and said nothing anyway. So you just get up there and you try and go vertical and you try and extend as well. Because it's better to go up there and try and say something than to try and say nothing at all. So I thought that sneeze. I think I still am. No. Oh, excuse me.
Bless you.
Okay, so what hopefully that's giving you a little bit with those two approaches is how to think about debates strategically in context of what is happening at the time. Try and identify early what your opening is doing. That will give you the figure out what you should try and do instead, and then you can look at your pool of arguments and pick which ones to run that match that. Now, there's a third way, or a third thing you can do closing half that kind of fits in both of these things. This is my all-time favorite TikTok line meme on the internet. So, finding a hole in the opening half and trying to fill it. So if you talk to a lot of teams that have won Worlds, the Sydney team won Worlds a couple of years ago that really ascribed to this theory, is that their whole approach to closing was they would listen to the top half, figure out what was the missing link in the top half, what was something that hadn't been proven, it was actually the underlying premise or the hidden premise or the key that unlocked the debate, and then they would try and do that as their extension and use that as a way to frame why they'd actually beat the top half by solving the top half match, almost. So this can be vertical or it can be horizontal. And what this is really good for is that if you can find a missing piece of analysis that can make the debate fall into place, it won't make your judge very happy. If anyone's done a bunch of judging, there's nothing like a sense of relief that floats over you. You've got this nagging hole that no one's answering, and someone gets up there and answers it for you. There's a genuine flood of, what's the happy chemical?
Serotonin.
Serotonin? Yeah? Yeah? So one of you here is studying like med-related stuff. It's not the lawyer who answered. Anyway, whatever it is, the happy chemicals up here. This is so outside what the debate this presentation is about. Anyway, the judge feels good, so you can make the judge feel happy. But two, it allows you to take a bit of credit for other teams' claims if it is your missing information that helps build the debate and picks it up. So sometimes it's good to just sit back in top half and think about what is missing from this. Like approach it like a judge. If I was a judge, what would I need to have to believe these teams' claims? So if it's your own opening, you then go and prove that claim. If it's the opposite opening, you disprove the thing that they need to prove to win, and that can hopefully help you get you into the top half and get you up there. The con is here. It has to be important, that link. Like you can prove a missing link, but if it's unimportant, it doesn't matter in the debate. That doesn't give you much credit. So you should also use it. So when you use it is when there's something wrong, when you think there's something missing in the top half. This is not so much a strategy that sits on its own, it kind of fits with vertical and horizontal, but it's a way to think about what the purpose of that extension is, as a way to sell to the judge about why you won that extension. Now, there's one more approach to closing half that again can be vertical or horizontal, and that is rebuttal. It is 100% legitimate for your extension to be entirely rebuttal. So you can get up there at CG and just rebut all of OO and claim that as an extension. Similarly, as you see, you do it to OG or CG, whatever. So it is good, it can just be fine, just get up there and do rebuttal. That's particularly useful if your opening has not done a very good job rebutting the other team. And that's very true if you're closing government, because DPM is the only speaker who can respond to OO. So if you get a chance to give more responses to all of OO, that can be a very strong tactic as well. So be very ready to knock out your diagonal opening. Your opposite closing can also be knocked out then if they're derivative, you do a very good job rebutting them, and it can also make you stand out from your opening too. So there's lots of benefits of just being really responsive in the extension. The con here is that without a substantive contribution, you may not get over your opening. Excuse me. So yeah, if your opening does a very good job advancing the motion or advancing an opposition to the motion, and all you do is rebuttal, it makes it sort of have like a positive thing to weigh it out to get over them, but it can help you get out over other teams in the debate. So when to use it? If you don't have any new arguments, or you woke up and chose violence, what I've got written here. So particularly, hey Nathan, it can be particularly useful in out rounds as well, where you've just got to try and knock out two teams and sail through with another one, and just try and rebut two teams out of the debate to ensure that they don't win. So don't think of rebuttal as not being an quality extension. The thing I'll note or caution on this slide, because I get stuck with this all the time when I'm speaking member, is if you do have a genuine substantive contribution that's not based on rebuttal, don't get too caught up and do 6 minutes of rebuttal and leave no time for your substantive extension. Always prioritise an extension if you have it, and do that first and then worry about rebuttal, because you've got a whip speaker in the rebuttal, you've got to get the extension out there at member, because it can't be credited as new material at whip. Does that make sense? Okay. So, prep time. Let's talk about how we should approach prep with being a closing afternoon. The best thing to do is genuinely just to prep like you would for a normal debate. Because normally the most obvious arguments are going to be the most important arguments, and if your opening doesn't run them, that's great, because then you get to run the obvious arguments in the debate and run them well. So you should always approach prep, at least for the first 5 minutes, as you would a normal prep. All the like brainstorm and set out in a normal case as you otherwise would. And also think about modelling as well, so give insights in case you're opening this is a part of the model, also give this thing about what to expect in the debate. Then start thinking about outside the box, think about what isn't obvious. Okay, we've run through this, we've got an idea of what we're saying here. Is there a stakeholder we're missing? Is there a context we're missing? Stuff we talked about earlier about what extensions can be, thinking about that kind of checklist and trying to think, okay, how can we grow this? Is there a new angle to this we can look at? And that's where you want to get creative. That's where you want to be imaginative and start thinking about how you can draw things as much from the motion as possible. Then you come together with all those ideas, you write them all down on a piece of paper each, and you rank those arguments about what is your most priority to run and what's your last priority to run. And then when you're in the debate, you just cross out arguments that are run and you run with what is left in the debate. And obviously, if your opening is run everything, all your list is crossed off, you go back to the top of the list and you think, okay, what can we run better than our opening? And if you go to the list again, you're still at 0, and you go back to the top and you just run that top priority argument again, so you've got something to say and you give it a crack. Probably lose to your opening, but you've got there and said something, and that's okay. But sometimes you might also win, you never know. The next thing you should do once you have the argument is think about strategy. What do you want to do with those arguments? How do you want to approach different teams? Like, do you think, okay, we're tactically we're pretty sure we haven't got a great extension here, so we're not going to beat our opening, we're very good, but we can try and knock out our opposition benches here. Or we really want to make sure there's nothing left for our closing. So thinking about strategy a bit in that prep time is actually super important as well. The annoying thing is you have no time to write speeches in prep as a closing team. So you have to just have a discussion about what the argument's going to look like, what we're going to prove in it, and then you write it in the bench. The reason for that is it's inefficient to write arguments in prep as closing, because you might not get to run that extension. And it is better to have more discussion about more ideas so that you can write them in prep. I will caveat that by saying that many good teams do write out their whole extension in prep, because they're just so bloody smart. They've already cracked the code in the debate and have a solid extension separately. But for most debaters, it is far better and preferable to not do that, because you use too much path dependency there. You're better off just having a broad idea of what the arguments are and then fleshing them out when you're in the debate. And then it's obviously hard to talk on the bench when you're in the debate, because you're going to listen to the other side, you're a bit too noisy, etc. That's why it's good to have a rough overview of what the arguments and content mean in prep, rather than trying to do it on the bench in the debate. Does that make sense about prep? Okay. Whips and extensions then. So, I want to talk a bit about how to approach whipping an extension. It's also a very big part of an extension here as well. The best way to think about it in whip speech is you're the cheerleader for the extension. Your sole job is to get up there and tell the judge how bloody good our extension was and why it wins the debate. Get out the pom-poms, jump up and down, do the routine. You are, who's the cheerleader in High School Musical? You are that character to Troy. He's the basketball guy, right?
Yes. Gabriella.
Yeah, you're Gabriella to Troy. But she's not a cheerleader, right?
She's not a cheerleader.
Yeah. I come to you guys and help with pop culture references and you guys write me down. Okay, you're acting as the Britney to the Finn. They're never dated though.
No, Quinn to Finn.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're acting as the Queen to the Finn. Minus all the weird stuff they did. Anyway, let's get off Glee. Let's get back to this presentation. Apologies for anyone watching online who's never seen Glee, doesn't know what we're talking about. So acting as a cheerleader, you want to sell the judge as to why this extension wins the debate. So what I think about whip speeches is, you want to think about the debate through the lens of your extension. So the way that actually manifests is, quite often when I'm doing a whip speech, my issues or my themes in the whip speech will sometimes just be the same headings or themes or questions the member speech had. So we're going to bring you 3 things in extension. I'll bring those same 3 headings of whip and then just insert the teams they clash with or the arguments they clash with under each heading. So that way what you're doing is you're signaling to the judge how your extension fits into the whole debate and is actually quite responsive to everybody. So that's, I think, the first approach I'd take to whipping, is to try and think about the debate through the lens of your extension. Unfortunately, that works best for opposition whip, but But for government whip, it's a little bit harder because you just have to direct respond to the opposition member's extension. So sometimes it'll be like 2 minutes of just like, or however long it takes, taking down the op member extension, and then doing what I've just said about whipping the debate through your extension. But always think about how can I relate this to my extension? How can I show that my extension is the best thing in the debate? That works best when your extension kind of fits lots of parts of the debate. Sometimes your extension, particularly when you debate the extension is vertical or something like that. When your extension is far more horizontal, or sits very different in the side for most of the debate, that's when you might have to take a slightly different approach. And that would be sort of whipping and defending your extension from any attacks it's received, weighing it versus something else, and then just direct rebutting other teams. And that's not the problem. I guess it's a feature, not a bug of BP, but there are lots of strategies you to approach things about picking the right time. So through the lens of your extension, just stealing extension ideas, whipping your extension, and then dealing with the other issues of the day. But if nothing, if all else fails, and it's a great default starting point for your extension, for your whip speech rather, is just to do it team by team. So what did closing positions say? So what did the other closing half team say? Rebut their extension. What did the diagonally opposite team say in opening? Rebut that extension. What was our extension? And use that to trade off in weigh versus your opening. And that's the thing I think is important to think about is like what's knifing, what's not knifing, etc. I get really sick. A lot of judges get sick of when teams in closing like, now I'm going to rebut my opening. No, you're not. That's against the rules. So what you want to do is think about not rebutting your opening, not saying they're wrong. What you're trying to do is frame your extension as being more important. So you don't say, and the line there is like, our extension is more important because OGs is wrong for 3 reasons. That's enough. Our extension is more important than opening for 3 reasons. And then you give the reasons as to why it's more important, or what opening is missed that make it more important. You're not contradicting and telling why your opening is wrong, you're just explaining what makes your extension better. So if all else fails, what was the other team's extension? Why did we beat that? Why did we beat that diagonally opening team? And then why does our extension outweigh our opening team? That's the 3 issues you have in the debate. Sometimes you'll be lucky and your opposite closing team will be incredibly derivative of their opening, so you can kind of rebut the whole bench in one go, and it gives you more time to do other things in the debate. So try and think about, again, thinking about where all this material fits in the broad structure of the debate as a whole. Does that make sense? Okay, there's nothing else. With your extension, tell us why your extension is the best thing in the world. Okay, some last miscellaneous tips then on BP. Label everything as an extension. Just get up there and lie. So, I know I said earlier about having rebuttal extensions. Don't get up there and say, I'm going to have a rebuttal extension, rebuttal 1. You get up there and you go, 3 points of extension today, speaker. Extension point 1 will be, to use the prison example from earlier, why prisoners are able to consent to these procedures. This will respond to opening a position. So all you need is give a rebuttal there, but you've called it an extension. So all the judges on the panel are like, oh, extension 1, writing it down. If they just hear rebuttal, they're like, rebuttal, just not taking as much attention to it. And then extension 2 will be explaining why prisoners will get better rehabilitation out of this. That could again be directly responsive to OO on why rehab will get worse, but because you've labelled as an extension, judges listen to it more. And this was something Jimmy Stratton observed. He's a very, very good debater from back in the day. When he judged Worlds a couple of times, that so many of these panelists would just write down the headings of what people said were extensions, or at the very last 30 seconds of the speech, the team would be like, we showed you 3 things today. Panelists will write those 3 things down, and in discussions, the chair will be like, what did they prove today? And they'll list those 3 things. So you want to make it as easy as possible to see what the extension is for those people. So you just say, this is my extension. So label everything as an extension in your speeches. Okay, does that make sense? All right. Second thing is having something to say. I said earlier, having something to say is better than having nothing to say at all. So if worst case, you just got no extension, get up there and just practice, just give the case anyway. If you're derivative your opening, who cares? People are derivative all the time and win, people are derivative all the time and lose. Doesn't matter. Get up there and say something. That's what we do this activity, right? Practice, to have fun, to give speeches. The result is ultimately that's important. It's more important you say something. And the third thing is think tactical. So if you hear the debate and you're like, far out, there's just no way we think we can beat this team. We can't get the first. All right, how do we get the second in this debate? What do we need to do to lock in the second? If nothing else, it's like, okay, we've got one job in this debate. We're going to beat the other closing team. We're going to target them and we're going to knock them out of this debate. So obviously, step 1, try and win the debate. like you should be going here with the mindset, we're going to get first. But even if that is not possible, then you start thinking about, okay, what do we need to target? Who do we need to target to lock in some points in the debate and work the strategy around it based upon that? So it is legitimate, like you said, it's not just legitimate, it's encouraged at times in BP. You've only got 7 minutes in whip, 7 minutes in member delivery and extension. You can't cover the whole debate. So maybe you have to be like, yeah, if we have to dedicate 4 minutes of our speech to trying to attack OO. We barely have a chance of beating them. But if we took that 4 minutes and put it on SEA, we could definitely beat them. And that's a reasonable way of the debate to try and lock in a second or a third. So I think tactically as well about extension, who we're going to target, who we're going to try and beat to it. The last miscellaneous tip I forgot to go up there is just have fun. Extensions are a chance to be a bit wacky, to be a bit silly. Well, not to be silly, try and bring a new element to debate as well. So thinking outside the box can be very useful. Obviously, don't treat the debate like a joke, so things like taking it very serious, particularly at Worlds. But go in there and try and think outside the box. Embrace this opportunity to get those creative juices flowing and think outside the box about extensions. And the very last tip is just keep at it. The more you do, the better you'll get at it, and have some fun with it as well as you go along. All right, that I think is the end of the stuff I wanted to run. Dead on half an hour-ish. Are there any questions about extensions? Okay, well, thank you all very much. We'll have the topic in a second.
Yeah. Oh.
That last